Good morning. My name is Teresa Campbell. I'm with PIA Mid-America, and you have joined the PIM and Mid-America Financial Executives Program on the 2024-2025 Printing Outlook and Beyond. Note that all of our attendees are placed in mute mode to ensure a quality recording, which will be provided to members in the coming days. We encourage you to comment and ask questions during the program. We prefer that you type them in the Q&A field at the bottom of your screen and use the chat field for technical difficulties so our teams can address those as they come up. If your question doesn't get answered immediately, it means that our speaker is probably going to cover it at a later slide. So just hold on and we'll get to that.
Or is just going to ignore
it? Yeah, we're not going to ignore it. We'll get to it. The Financial Executives Council is coordinated by leaders in both the North Central and South Central parts of the U.S. They guide the programs and content that are offered every other month, and they focus on financial reporting and compliance, data management and security, and financial policies and planning. Our council co-chairs are Carl Nathy with Myers Printing, Ryan Wagner with Action Mailing and Printing, Matt Wills with LB Carlson, and Ken Rain with Daily Printing. Ken, will you introduce our speaker?
I'd love to. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Richard Romano. He's the managing editor of WhatTheyThink.com, the leading news and information portal for the graphic communications industry. He covers wide format. He manages and writes industry data analysis and oversees and writes What They Think's annual print business outlook survey and report. And I believe Richard's going to share that with us. He's also an author and co-author of books on technology and the print business. His most recent book is Beyond Paper, an interactive guide to wide format and specialty printing. Richard, let us know what's ahead of us in 2024 and 25 and take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Ken. And thank you all for attending. And thanks to PIM and Mid-America for inviting me to talk to you. I'll be presenting some data from our most recent Printing Outlook report, as well as some government data and just some other trends and things that are going on in the industry. Now, I usually begin these presentations with a joke, which is kind of meant to elucidate our approach to data. So these three statisticians are going out deer hunting. So they go out to the woods and they hide in the bushes. And before long, a buck walks into the clearing. And the first statistician gets up, takes aim, and fires. And it's 5 feet to the left. Second statistician gets up, takes aim, fires. 5 feet to the right. The third statistician immediately jumps up and says, I got him. Now, that's not the world's funniest joke. But the point is that most of the data that we present are aggregate data, that they're averages, that they're always outliers in any industry. So there are companies that are doing better than the average, and there are companies that are doing worse than the average. So that's just a little way of easing into what we'll be talking about today. Another caveat I want to add is that the survey data I'm going to be sharing is from our fall 2023 survey, as the fall 2024 survey is actually literally going into the field this week. And there'll be a link for all of you to go take it, which I encourage you to do. So this may seem like it might be old data. There's this sense in the industry that things a year or more ago seem like ages ago. We think of 2019 as the pre-pandemic era seems like it might as well be the 15th century. But despite what we experienced in 2020, things tend not to turn on a dime in the industry from year to year. So I think a lot of the stuff I'll be talking about is still valid. And we've also got some government data that should be more current and should shed a little bit more light on what's been happening over the course of 2024. So one of our survey respondents in the last survey wrote in, 2023 was a strange year, very inconsistent month to month and year to year. Trends meant virtually nothing. The market is very odd. And if we can say one thing about the industry since the pandemic, that's kind of been the case. And we'll see in a second just how things have progressed over the last 4 years. But certainly the trends we were seeing before the pandemic have certainly changed quite dramatically. So let's start with some business conditions. So the story so far, The printing industry had an outstanding 2019, which you may recall. If you were at Printing United 2019, which was the debut of Printing United, you remember there was this excitement in the industry, which we hadn't seen arguably since Print 97. It was just a great time to be in the industry. And we started 2020 with the best January in terms of revenues and value of print shipments in almost a decade. And then, well, we know what happened. The Ides of March in 2020 happened, and we all went into lockdown. There was a fairly quick rebound throughout the second half of 2020 and 2021. 2021 was almost back to normal. There were some variant surges in the virus, but it was over by summer. And 2022 began with, and you might remember the three big challenges we had back then. They were especially acute. They were supply chain disruptions. Remember, you couldn't get paper or other consumables. Finding and keeping employees was a challenge. And then inflation and cost increases went through the roof. And happily, 2 out of 3 of these have ebbed. Finding and keeping employees is still a challenge, but as we'll be seeing later, inflation is under control. And maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the supply chain disruptions have largely been overcome. I don't think it's as difficult to get paper as it used to be, and everything else is fairly easy to get. So we started 2023 with the best January since 2020. Sound familiar? And we ended 2023 fairly strong, although not as good as 2022. And so far, 2024 has been a little bit of a mixed bag, but the jury is still out. In our surveys, we ask about current business conditions, and we found that in 2023, print businesses across the board saw their revenues rise about 3.2% year over year. Now, one of the things I was taught to do by my mentor, Dr. Joe Webb, is always account for inflation. That's always an important thing to do. So we always take these revenue data and then profits, as we'll see shortly, and back out whatever the inflation rate is at the time we did these calculations. So if we back out the inflation rate from 3.2%, which at the time I did these calculations was 3.1%, we see that revenues actually rose about 0.1%. So that gives companies a good sense of how they're actually doing, rather than what they think they're doing. In terms of jobs and orders, fortunately, we don't have to adjust those for inflation, but happily, jobs and orders went up by 3.7% year over year from 2022 to 2023. And profitability sort of lagged both revenues and jobs and was up 2.7% year over year, or if you adjust for inflation, yikes, minus 0.4%. Profitability has always been a bit of a dodgy thing, especially for the largest print businesses. You'll see that there's what we always used to call the tale of two cities, is that the profitability amongst the largest companies was always less than that of the smaller ones. For a number of different reasons, larger businesses have more capital and other investments, and they're also not as able to be as nimble as the smaller print businesses. So pivoting to things like different types of digital printing, different types of products, getting into a wide format. I'm not saying that's a lot harder for very large companies to do unless they're talking about acquiring another business. Our business conditions index kind of looks a little bit like a Monty Python chart. Small businesses really had a hard time during the pandemic, but the business conditions were rising up till 2019, kind of leveled off in post-pandemic, and dropped a little bit in 2023. So we'll have to see how 2024 fares. I'm guessing it's going to be probably about on a par with 2023. Now, what are some of the top challenges and opportunities we've been seeing in the industry? Well, obviously, any of you could probably tell me that increasing plant productivity is the #1 business challenge. How do we make our plants more productive? How do we get more stuff out the door? Obviously, with less personnel, because you can see finding qualified production personnel is #3 on the list. And national economic conditions. We started asking this way back in the Trend Watch days, back in the first recessionette of 2001 after the dot-com boom. And we saw this really spike during the Great Recession of 2010, 2011. And it's one of those things that we don't really, it's one of those, a rising tide will lift all boats kind of things. It's not something anybody can do anything about. It's just kind of there. And the reason why it's #2 on this list is so concerning for me is because the economy has actually been really good for the last couple of years. So I'm not quite sure what they're thinking or why they think that national economic conditions is a big challenge. But it really hasn't been better than it has been recently. And of course, pricing is a perennial top 5 business challenge. In terms of the new business opportunities, again, improving economic conditions, that's one of those sort of not very proactive kind of things that you sort of sit there and don't have to do anything. You just wait for things to get better. Again, not sure that things can really get a lot better, but that's what it is. Customers outsourcing more work to us, that's been a traditional #1 new business opportunity. And the way our boilerplate explanation for that is, for the longest time, print customers were buying their own printing equipment. Obviously not offset presses or anything like that, but desktop printers, maybe something a little higher end, and just doing a lot of their own marketing collateral, or even getting a small wide format machine and doing their own posters or whatever. And if print businesses can convince those customers that, hey, we can do this a lot better, we can do it a lot cheaper, you have enough, because businesses across the board are having employment problems. Why have your employees that you need to be doing your core stuff? Why have them do printing? We can do that for you. So that was always the rationale behind that business opportunity. Hiring new salespeople, that was always a top 5 new business opportunity. Only we had better sales guys, we'd be doing so much better. That's been the thought for decades. And we just added in this very survey, diversifying print product application offerings, and that came in at 1/4 of print businesses. And that really is going to be a major trend going forward, which we'll see a little bit later in this presentation, is that you can't really just stick to what Dr. Joe used to call stick to your knitting. You sort of really need to keep an eye on, well, what's in demand in the marketplace, what's a new cool area to get into, what's a lucrative area to get into, what are customers looking for, how can we expand what we're doing to take advantage of those demands. And then, of course, helping customers integrate print and non-print marketing campaigns. That's always been a traditional top 5 business opportunity, especially in this age of QR codes and augmented reality and all sorts of ways of making print interactive. It's a lot easier than ever now for print business to sort of help their customers integrate both print and non-print marketing campaigns. In terms of what print businesses are buying, well, good 24% have no planned investments. Now, they say they have no planned investments, but things inevitably come up. I mean, they're probably not going to be buying a press if they've selected we have no planned investments, because that really isn't something you buy sort of on the spur of the moment. There has been one drag. My colleague Marco Bohr from IT Strategies, he cited some time ago one big drain on the investment, on the capital investment in the industry as of late, is really high interest rates that have really sort of prevented a lot of companies from maybe making a large equipment purchase that they would have otherwise if rates were lower. And in fact, we did see in our challenges that financing costs of new equipment was really spiked as a challenge. So until the Fed decides to lower rates, which hopefully they'll be doing soon, hopefully that will be enough to spur some major capital investment in the industry. But in terms of what print businesses say they're going to be buying in the next year, traditionally finishing and bindery equipment, both for digital and analog, has been in the top 3. Workflow automation, as we'll see in a moment, workflow automation software really spiked, and it's easy to see why, and we'll see why in a minute with the employment situation as it is. They're looking to get more stuff automated in their business. We recently added mailing software and equipment, and that's come in fairly high-ish. And color quality control, this is the highest it's been in quite some time, and that's because, as many of you know from experience, print businesses finding their customers are really looking to boost the quality and sort of really match their color across all sorts of media. And we have a question, I take it.
We do. You talk about interest rates, and do you think the impending interest rate cut will spur more capital investments in the industry?
Hopefully it'll be enough. I'm not the expert on these sorts of things, but that's the hope, that if rates start going down, and if that signals that there'll be future cuts in the future, I suppose the future cuts in the past, I guess, that it'll spur even more investment. But hopefully, a 1/4 point or a 1/2 point or whatever they're planning on doing will be enough to sort of really boost some investment. But for the time being, that's been a drag on investment, but fingers crossed.
Excellent.
Thanks for the question. We always ask every now and then, instead of asking this more regularly, what are some of the new application areas our print business is looking to get into? About a decade ago, wide format was the top area. That's down to about 9% who are planning to add that. So it's kind of about 1/3 of the industry, 41% in this case, but generally we've seen in all these surveys about 1/3 of the industry are what I call the never wides. They have absolutely no interest in adding wide format printing. They don't get it. They don't particularly care for it. It just reminds me that when I was at Printing United 2019, I overheard somebody saying, "What's all this wide format stuff doing here?" So it's an essential part of the industry, but some people are content to ignore it. Where are the hot areas that people are looking to get into? Well, folding carton printing is where they seem to be looking. Flexible packaging a little bit, corrugated. I know us pundit types have been saying that there are all these opportunities in packaging and converting, and there actually are. But it's a tough nut to crack, not just in terms of the equipment, but just in terms of sort of getting into that market and sort of proving your credibility that we can do packaging, especially for large consumer brands. You know, their packaging converter it's almost like a trade secret. I mean, nobody really wants to admit how they do their packaging. But certainly for smaller brands, boutique brands, you know, the kinds of salsas you find at farmers markets, that kind of sort of small run packaging, I think, is where the sweet spot for many print businesses is. And of course, 3D printing, that's very small. Directed garment printing. I know my colleague Carrie Sherburne is always trying to highlight opportunities in digital textile printing, and there are certainly opportunities there, but so far our survey respondents have not seen it. Looking at the history of some of our selected planned investments, finishing and binding equipment is at an all-time high. Workflow automation software, as I intimated, that really spiked to 17%. There's a lot of interest in that with employment, the situation being what it is. Mailing and software equipment has gone through the roof. Right after the pandemic, there was a spike in an additional space or a new location. We didn't break this down as to whether they were downsizing because of work from home or if they were looking for a larger location to expand their capabilities. So it could go either way. Maybe we'll clarify this in the current survey, but that seems to have ebbed as an investment. And of course, color quality control has hit an all-time high as well. Yes, question.
Couple of questions on that and the previous slide. So we'll do with the color control. The question is are the big brands driving color quality, and can you elaborate?
Are the big brands? I think a lot of players are driving color quality, but certainly it's the big brands that, I mean, whenever you see a presentation on a new piece of digital equipment, they're always trying to say, oh, we can hit this brand color. We have orange now, so we can hit the Home Depot. We have red, so we can hit Coke. So I think certainly the big brands are doing it, but I think it's starting to trickle down to some of the smaller brands as well. So they want everything to be as accurate as possible, especially if they're trying to match their logo or their colors across different types of media and different types of printing, whether it's flexo, whether it's digital, whether it's offset, or whether it's online.
If you'll go back just one slide, the next question is, do you have any thoughts on trends for new application areas year over year? So you had said some of those, they're never going to go to wide format, although the sign industry has taken a huge evolution, and we're no longer cutting letters and rubbing them on boards ever. It's really moved to more of a commercial print type arena. What have you seen year over year?
In terms of wide format, signage, I remember my first ISA Sign Expo, I think it was in 2008, 2010, somewhere thereabouts. It was the first time that you really saw printers at the sign show. It used to be all channel letters and CNC routers and all that, and you're still the first wide format printers turning up in the sign business. And it's still a mix. If you go to a Fast Signs or a Signorama or like any of the big sign franchises, I mean, there's still a lot of conventional sign making. But certainly there's a lot of stuff you can do, with wide format printers, and like experiential graphics, for example, or environmental graphics, they also call it, was a big area just before the pandemic. And I think it's starting to come back as well, where you're sort of decorating the insides of offices, and you've got glass windows, and you put decals on it and all that sort of thing. You basically put graphics on any surface or employees maybe. So you can put graphics on just about anything. So those are one of the big trends in wide format. In terms of packaging, folding carton is certainly there. Flexible packaging, that's some of the Indigo machines are really sort of raising the bar for flexible packaging, at least in terms of digital. And we've got a bunch of videos that Dave Zwang did from D-Scoop that talked to a lot of companies getting into digital flexible printing. So that's certainly a growth area, even if it hasn't shown up in the data all that much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, hiring plans. So every survey we ask, are you considering hiring, adding staff in the next 12 months? And it's 63% in fall 2023. This is the highest this has ever been since we started asking this question. So everyone is looking for people. And as you can see on the other side, what positions? Post-press finishing, press operator, and some sales reps. So it's almost a good mix of production and sales. So as you all know, finding staff is a tough challenge, and that's why everyone is interested in automation. And this is a kind of a depressing slide, which is that how are you searching for staff? And almost 3/4 of respondents said, oh, just like general online recruitment sites. And if you look way down, less than a quarter are reaching out to printing industry associations like you guys, or reaching out to higher ed graphic arts programs like Cal Poly or RIT. And that's really kind of a shame, because that can really be a really good source of employees. We did the Drupa show daily this year, and I still have PTSD from that. But we had a bunch of interns from Cal Poly come out with us, and they were bright. They knew the industry, they knew their stuff. And a lot of them are graduating this year, or graduated last year, or graduated earlier this year, and are getting positions in the industry. We're having some of them start to write for us. And that's a really good source of high quality employees. Certainly the leaders of the future coming out of some of those programs. So if you're looking for staff, skip the monster and maybe talk to the PGSL, or if you've ever heard of the Mariano Rivera Foundation. My colleague Heidi Tolliver Walker has written about some of their success stories where the Mariano Rivera Foundation is working with folks like Hanukkah Minolta and EFI, and they've been taking at-risk youth and training them to work in the graphics industry. And they've had some great successes and placements there. So there are lots of places to find really good people who are specialized in the graphic arts. So you just need to figure out how to look for them. In terms of automation adoption, have you implemented workflow automation? 62% said yes. 37% said no. What does that automation comprise? Well, basically software-based estimating, pre-press, and some said web to print. Independent robots are down to 5%. But if you've been to Drupa and/or Printing United, you probably might expect that number to go up in the next couple of years as the cost of robotics and robots and cobots start to come down. We asked about AI. We're sort of bemused by the idea of AI, although we're getting a little bit more interested in it. At present, about 18% use AI for graphic design, creative services. You've probably seen all those AI generated images. We occasionally use it for our magazine covers, although we discover that it really needs a lot of work. But that seems to be the direction things are going. I was talking to a designer at Printing United, and they're all terrified about what AI is going to mean for the graphic design community. Obviously, end users want to get design as cheaply as possible, but as they may find, you get what you pay for. The real sweet spot for AI, at least in terms of the printing industry, is certainly things like production analytics. It can sort of analyze all your shop data to figure out where your profitable jobs are, where your unprofitable jobs are, where you can better spend resources. So that sort of thing is where AI really sort of, that's sort of AI's wheelhouse. And estimating. We have a joke at WhatTheyThink that most print businesses still use Sally in the back for estimating. The person who's been there forever and sort of has all the magic formulas and secret sauce in her head or his head. And that's how they do estimating, but that's not going to be practical going forward, certainly given the diversity of substrates and print technologies out there. So an AI might be a good way of automating a lot of the estimating. So we're still keeping our eye on AI. We're dubious. It's not just a buzzword, but it still has yet to prove that it has any great worth. And everyone's certainly throwing a lot of money at it, but whether how that will shake out is hard to say. My suspicion is that it's likely that shops will end up saying that, oh, yes, we use AI, simply because it's built into all the software that they get from vendors. Vendors are always now touting, their AI-based software solutions. So I think that they're just going to be print businesses are going to be getting into AI pretty much by default, simply because that's what their software uses. It's not going to be deliberate on their part, but it'll be there, kind of like the cloud. There are some industry data from government sources. This is looking at printing establishments going back to 2010 up through 2021. This is from County Business Patterns, which is published yearly by the Bureau of the Census. And you can see we didn't take too much of a hit after the pandemic. The 2021 data is where businesses lost during COVID would have shown up, and it really wasn't a precipitous drop, which was good to see. There's a caveat, and this is going to be getting a little bit inside baseball. So when we look at government data, we're looking at essentially NAICS 323. And what is NAICS? That is the North American Industrial Classification System. And that's what the government and companies like Dun& Bradstreet use to track businesses, in all sectors of the economy. And 323 is printing and related businesses, which is the broadest category for our industry. And the problem with relying on 323 is that it doesn't really capture everybody who does printing. For example, some years ago, there was a great push for printers to become marketing services providers. And that meant that, okay, they're no longer in a manufacturing category, which is what 323 is, but they're now in a services category, 541, I think, marketing. And some of those are, they don't think of themselves as manufacturers. And some of them, I did some of the shops I've interviewed over the years, I've sort of looked them up in Dun & Bradstreet and see, well, where do they classify themselves? And they're mostly in 323, but there's a lot of them are all over the map. Some of them are information providers. Some of them are in other types of categories that you wouldn't think. So wrangling these numbers is not always easy. But for now, I think using NAICS 323 is still the best way of looking at the industry for now. Yes, question.
So it doesn't include the mailing part of things either, correct? Is this envelope manufacturers as well and
That would
postal
be
service
a
providers?
converting category, which is 322. And if you go to WhatTheyThink.com, every other week we do a data analysis where we look at different types of converters and those establishments. So you can find a big backlog of all those different types of categories on What They Think.
Absolutely. So such a wide range. Of course, it doesn't include paper. It doesn't include.
Yeah, this is just people who do printing and some post-press and pre-press.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Every month we track the value of printing shipments, which is essentially revenues. And we have been doing pretty good this year, certainly compared to the last couple of years. We rose in May, and then things took a bit of a nasty turn in June. Not sure why that would be. If we keep up with our normal seasonality, July is going to be kind of a depressing month. But again, as the guy I cited at the beginning of this presentation, trends mean nothing these days, so it could go up through the roof next month. It's hard to say. But what seems to be consistent is that October is the best month for the industry, as all the pre-Christmas stuff is coming out. This is an election year, for better or worse, and that usually spurs a lot of print work as campaigns spend on direct mail and certainly signage. So we'll be keeping an eye on this. If we look at our January to June compared to last year, we're a little off of last year. So I'm hoping that we can at least finish close to what we did last year, adjusted for inflation, of course. Looking at profitability, that's always been a very messy data series, but profitability is up and down, mostly down. But it seems to be up a little bit as of Q1 2024. All right, so what's the general macroeconomic landscape? I mean, obviously, we can talk about the industry all day, and I could, but we play in a much larger sandbox. So what's been going on macroeconomically? And if you ask, we got a comment from one of our survey participants last year, where we always have at the end of the survey, we have a write-in, what did you think of last year's business? What are you looking forward to next year? And a couple of folks wrote in and said, if only people would stop thinking that the economy was really bad, we can do a lot better. Because as you know, when people think that the economy is bad, they slow down their spending on discretionary things like what a lot of printing is. And if you look at GDP growth, it's been consistently rising, a little bit of a dip during the pandemic, but it's still been going high. Question.
But you talked a little bit about political, and so that sparked some conversation in the questions. And they want to know if you've personally seen a decrease in political mailings. Some of our members are seeing that happen for their organizations.
It was something that started, I think, in the late 2000s. I think 2008 was the first election cycle that we really saw social media take over. I've personally been seeing less print direct mail. whether that's just my neighborhood or my district or whatever. But I mean, certainly a lot of it is shifting to online. Certainly social media is there. I think there's still going to be some. It's probably not, what it would have been, say, around, 1996 or whatever. But I think it's still a substantial portion, and lawn signs certainly are a major part of of political spending as well.
Excellent. Okay.
So getting back to some of our macro data, yeah, GDP has been consistently on the rise. If we look at it from quarter to quarter, we've certainly not had any negative quarters since 2022. This year has actually been pretty good, and the GDP now, which is a service of the Atlanta Fed, is predicting Q3 GDP to be even higher. So that's good news. In terms of employment, unemployment is at record lows. It's been rising over the past couple of months, but it's still very low by historical terms. And especially amongst prime age workers, the labor force participation rate is still fairly high, especially again for your prime age workers, 24 to 56. So employment has been pretty good. And inflation, yeah, we had some really bad inflationary problems in 2022. That was sort of recovering from the supply chain shocks due to the pandemic, but that's pretty much under control now, and it is back down to what the Fed's target rate, which is why they're thinking of cutting interest rates, because inflation is, as far as they're concerned, less of an issue than it had been. Whether it's a little too late, that's an argument, but they really have no excuse now. All right, so what are some of the prevailing trends in the industry? Well, some of the economic trends, yeah, the economy is still doing pretty good. GDP is rising, Q2 is exceptionally good, and Atlanta Fed is forecasting 2.5% growth in Q3. Unemployment, yeah, is on the rise, but it's still fairly low, especially for prime age workers. Inflation under control, likely Fed rate cut, and no sign of a recession. Yet, I mean, it's one of those law of averages. We're bound to have a recession at some point, but for now, there really is no sign that there is one. There's congressional brinksmanship over spending bills, which could wreak economic havoc, but we've managed to thwart all of those in the past, so hopefully that situation will continue. Demographic trends, continued challenges in finding and recruiting staff. That's a big issue, but then again, there are two sides of the employment issue. Obviously, finding employees for your own business is tough. But what we've been seeing since the recession is that people have become, especially millennials, have become a lot more entrepreneurial. There was a term coined, in 2025, the Great Resignation, where everyone was quitting their job, and they weren't doing it to, sit on the couch and eat pork rinds. They were starting businesses, and we'll see in a second that. New business formation went through the roof during the pandemic and has remained pretty high. And that's an opportunity to find new print customers. This is Census Bureau data. This is new business applications. This is the most recent data I have from July. And it's not, people working at home, doing their own graphic design or whatever, or blogging. A lot of it is, if you look at, the categories by NAICS, a lot of it is in your retail, construction, professional services. And these are the types of businesses that need things that printers do, whether it be marketing, collateral, promotional materials, signage, display graphics. So if you're looking for a good source of new clients, look at new business formations in your area. That might be a good way to start recruiting folks and getting new businesses on board. Some of the technological trends, automation will become more necessary than ever, and not just at the front end, but throughout. Robots, cobots, and mobots. My colleague Dave Zwang used the term mobots in a presentation he did last month, and I'm not entirely sure. I think it stands for mobile robots. I did a Google search, and all I could find was the Missouri Botanical Gardens, which I don't think that's what that is. But anyway, a bot of some kind. So we'll be seeing more hardware automation, certainly as the costs come down. AI is coming, sort of. A great tool for analyzing plant data. And again, it's probably not going to be a conscious implementation. It's just simply built into the software that we use. Of course, there could be another interpretation of conscious implementation of AI. I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Kurzweil, but he is a sort of futurist. He wrote a book that just came out called "The Singularity is Nearer: When We Merge with AI." Apparently, he's really keen on the human consciousness merging with AI and us living on in computers. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. I've been reading him for years. I'm not always convinced that the future is going to be as bright as he thinks it is, but it's always interesting to see what he says. Yes, the AI is being implanted. Yes.
Tell us his last name again. Ray
Kurzweil.
Kurzweil.
Kurzweil. He became famous in the 70s. He invented a text-to-speech device, and that's sort of where he was an inventor. And I remember once my father was at some event that he was at, and somebody had stolen the machine. And my father's coming, well, why didn't the machine just say, "Help, I'm being stolen"? So, but anyway, he's a great futurist. Again, sometimes you have to take what he says with a grain of salt. But he's been right about more things than he's been wrong on. I remember one, I was watching some documentary or a TED talk or whatever, and he was saying that we're going to have like nanobots in our bloodstream that will communicate with the internet and sort of tell us how to solve whatever blood problems we have. And I'm not sure I want my blood connected to the internet, but these things are coming, and we may laugh about it now, but in 30 years, that may be the way things are. So anyway, just a little bit tangential, but interesting to pay attention to anyway.
All right. For those interested, give us the title one more time. The Singularity is Near.
Singularity is nearer, because he did a book in 2005 called The Singularity is Near. And this is sort of a sequel. If I can get this to not blur.
Yeah, the singularity is nearer. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'll put it in the presentation when I send it off.
Excellent. Thank you.
So we can look forward to sort of connecting our brains to our DFEs at some point. Where was I? Okay, more technology trends. Again, increased emphasis on sustainability. I'm sure a lot of you are starting to see that now throughout the print supply chain, especially in packaging. There are some strict EU rules coming regarding circularity and sustainability, and that's going to impact U.S. packaging printers. We're kind of behind the curve when it comes to sustainability, certainly compared to Europe. But at the end of the day, nobody is going to want to create two different types of packaging, one for Europe and one for North America. So I think it's just inevitable that we're going to have to go along with whatever Europe is doing, which we should be doing anyway. As we saw in some of the opportunities, diversifying, adding new products and services, that's going to be something to keep in mind going forwards. Whether that's textiles and self-signage, will it be packaging? Folding carton is certainly a promising area. And there are all sorts of other kinds of complementary printing. Tchotchke printing, printing on golf balls or cell phone cases. That's always a big application area and a growth area. Direct to garment, promotional T-shirts. There are all sorts of things that print businesses can offer to their clients that are in demand. And of course, I'm working with Tactiful's Kevin Abergel on a big digital embellishment study, and I'm obviously bullish on digital embellishments. We haven't seen it a lot in the data, but I remain convinced that at some point they're going to take off. So I'm going to keep them on the prevailing trends, even though that's sort of my bias rather than anything else. And then finally, what are the ultimate trends? Question.
Quickly,
Sure.
what are you seeing? Are you seeing traditional printers looking more and more at diversified products, or are they collaborating with others?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of them are collaborating with others. Certainly, that was the case in white format. That's certainly a lot of the case with some of the textile stuff and newer stuff. Is that before you sort of take the plunge and buy the equipment, outsource it. Find a partner and work with them. And then once it reaches a certain critical mass, then you can decide whether you want to bring the equipment in-house. And that's what a lot of companies have done. Or the larger companies just acquire a company that produces those types of things as well. So there are two paths to sort of adding that sort of stuff rather than just sort of going out and buying a Cornette machine or whatever.
We talk a little bit more about that in terms of, it seems that we've seen a lot of investment bankers getting into the printing industry, so much more so than before. What are your thoughts there?
That I'm not familiar with that side of things in terms of investing in the printing industry.
Right. And so an investment firm is buying printing companies versus a private investment firm versus printers buying printers and getting bigger and bigger.
I've heard some rumblings of that just via our every month we publish the target report from Mark Hahn, which is a look at mergers and acquisitions in the industry. And I've seen a little bit of that mentioned, but it's sort of encouraging that okay, we're now suddenly seeing this a sort of growth area. For a while, I mean, back in the 2000s, it was hard for print businesses to even get any kind of financing for a lot of things. So that's not my area of expertise, but it's good to hear.
Excellent.
All right. So ultimately, what we can say about the printing industry is that it's really a direct function of the demand for print. And print these days can be virtually any substrate, any material, any object. Again, if you've been to the shows, you know you can print on virtually anything. I remember I was at I think it was at Roland's booth, and they were printing on all this stuff. And the thought occurred to me, well, paper has become kind of an exotic substrate these days. And nobody prints on paper anymore. You're printing on golf balls. But yeah, I mean, anything can be print these days. And that's why I wrote a book called Beyond Paper. And anything is print these days. It's not just direct mail. It's not just ink on paper. It's ink on virtually anything. So that look at some of the various objects out there that you can print on and say, hey, I think my customers have a need for printing on these types of materials. They do a lot of events. They do a lot of promotion. Okay, maybe a little printed tchotchke like a golf ball or a cell phone case would be a good thing to offer them. So there are lots of opportunities out there if we sort of expand what we think of as print. And after all, since 2000, all our problems came from the replacement of print with electronic alternatives. And that's something we've been seeing since 2000, and it's probably not going to stop anytime soon. On the plus side, new printing technologies that facilitated wide format and signage, industrial printing, helped businesses add those new products. If you remember the infamous pivot during COVID, when a lot of commercial print businesses started adding signage so they could do those distancing signage and those little dots you used to see in supermarkets that everyone ignored. So yeah, just being nimble and flexible and being able to take on new types of print work is, I think, where the opportunities lie in the future. On the minus side, faster connectivity, true 5G, which someday will be here, has the potential to erode the demand for print even further. As people can do more things on their phones, they tend to do less things that involve print. And certainly marketers find ways of reaching people electronically via versus print. In terms of the COVID front, all's not really quiet on the COVID front. In fact, my boss just recently had a really nasty case of it a couple weeks ago. But new cases are less serious than they were in 2020. Certainly fatalities are down and the vaccinations have helped. So it's still out there, but it's pretty much, as we kind of thought, it's become kind of like the flu these days. But it still is out there, and there is always the potential that another variant could bring us back to 2020, but let's hope not. And of course, 2024 is an election year, as we were talking about earlier. It's not as print-centric as it used to be, but you can still get a decent bump from some kind of campaign-based printing. And this is our forecast. Why do we do economic forecasts? Well, so we can make astrologers look good. But this is what we forecast last fall in terms of the value of printing shipments going to 2023. Obviously, we're not a tremendously growing industry. I could be wrong. Things could turn around, but we're still seeing steady declines, but it's still going to be a healthy industry. We're probably going to continue seeing continued declines in establishments, but I think it's just more a case of right-sizing the industry given what the demand for print is. But again, we're probably going to find a lot more growth in those specialty areas, which I mentioned in my discussion of industry classification. How do we find them? Are they in 323? Or where are they going? So that's the challenge for us analysts, to figure out where these people have gone. But for now, this is what we're seeing in terms of people who consider themselves general commercial printers. And that's my story, and I am sticking to it. So if you have any further questions, by all means, chime in.
Excellent. So now is the time to type in the Q&A field or the chat field to let us know what questions you might have for Richard. And while you're doing that, there are some that want to know where they might be able to find your book, Beyond Paper.
It's on Amazon. It's an interesting thing because I had done it with, and I had done this a similar book with Dr. Joe Webb called The Third Wave. We did it in partnership with HP, who at the time had an AR app, which no longer exists. So all of the interactive elements in the book no longer function. So that's the danger. So the good thing about print is that you can still read the print edition, no problem, but all the electronic stuff doesn't work, which is kind of a shame. But it's on Amazon. I think it's on Amazon. And even all the books I've done with Dr. Joe, The Third Wave, Disrupting the Future, and think that one or two others are still there as well. They're a little dated now. We did them in the late 2000s, early 2010s. But there's some good stuff in them. We had some good jokes.
Mhm, mhm. Will you talk a little bit about the future of postal increases and how that will impact the printing industry?
Well, never good. Certainly, I mean, anytime you raise any kind of cost for printers, it sort of eats into margin. So it's it's going to have a negative impact. I don't know how much more I can elaborate on that. Depending what the size of the increase is, you can maybe mitigate it if it's not too bad. But certainly, it's a challenge. There was a certain ways you can get around some of that by commingling, I think, is one of the strategies that publishers use. I think even some direct mailers use that. So there are all sorts of strategies out there. And some print businesses like 4over, for example, are really good at sort of helping customers so take advantage of whatever strategies can help them save on postage costs. So that's really a good way of providing a value add for a lot of customers who do a lot of mailing, is try to navigate the Byzantine postal system and try to find ways of saving the money on mailing by the various strategies that exist.
So we have had some members get into the geofencing industry where they are doing a much more marketing style approach of being able to say the return on your investment for this mailing list covering this particular area or buying pattern of individuals in this area and being able to track it. So we've had some have success there. There's another
Oh, is that
question
every
here.
door direct mail? Because I know when every door direct mail came out, I know Dr. Joe was really keen on it, and it seems like a great idea. It seems like it's one of these things that should be utilized a lot more than it is, but it seems like a great tool for marketers and printers to help them.
Right, definitely impacting the direct marketing industry. And some of that customization, personalization, buying trends, all of that style. So if you're looking to purchase a car and you went online and searched for a white mid-size SUV, it wouldn't be surprising that you would get a direct mail piece with a white mid-size, whatever the brand is that you're looking for, Lexus, Acura, Honda, from that particular dealer, because they're tracking those searches and then customizing the print. Ken has a question here. Are some regions of the US doing better than others in regards to print sales?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm sure there are. I couldn't tell you which ones. I have to do some digging. But everything has. I think the Southeast is doing pretty well. I know in terms of, I not only know this because I follow the architectural index on new constructions, which is a good way of seeing where signage projects can come from. But the Northeast is a big area now for construction and architectural stuff. In terms of printing at that, I have to do some research and find out.
How is transportation impacting the print industry? Shipping costs continue to go up and up and up. They too have workforce concerns, trucking and rail and so forth. And so getting for print from one area of the country to another continues to be more expensive. What do you see there?
Yeah, and that's certainly the case. I mean, a lot of the bigger printers, they sort of buy a plant in certain areas so that you can sort of send stuff, the decentralized or centralized printing, and sort of print where you need it. But yeah, I mean, no question, the transportation, fortunately, gas isn't expensive as it used to be, which is sort of a major component of shipping costs. But yeah, I mean, once prices go up, they never seem to come down, do they?
Right, right. Next question. When you're looking at the overall strategies for printers, what do you think is the most profitable sector for the print industry for the next 5 years?
I would say the most profitable sector is whatever your customers are interested in getting into, whatever the demand is from customers. It'll differ by business, it'll differ by region. I would have to say, I mean, direct mail is still a big area that came back after COVID. Certainly, mailbox volumes haven't gone down that I've seen. Wide format is still a big area. Not many people are getting into it anew, but I mean, there's all sorts of demand for display graphics and all that sort of stuff. Packaging, obviously, I think folding carton is going to be the sort of the next big area to look into, especially as the equipment becomes cheaper and more digitized, and you can do shorter runs and sort of tap into those untapped markets of the companies that don't need 5 million boxes. They just need a few thousand or whatever. I think that's a big growth area. And digital textiles. Everyone sort of poo-poos textiles, but I think that's a big growth area as well. And it's not appreciably different from what print business is already doing. It's ink on something. That's what print is. It's ink on something, whether that's textiles or whether it's paper. Kind of the same basic principle. I mean, the equipment changes a little bit, but it's the same principle.
Talk a little bit about kind of this new trend for millennials to unplug and disconnect from the internet and go back to more tactile experience.
There was a book that came out, I think, 10 years ago called the Return of Analog or whatever it was, where, yeah, certain millennials and even younger folks, my nieces, when they were young teenagers, were sort of getting back into, film-based photography and vinyl records and and all that stuff. And I'm not a millennial, obviously. And so I really can't speak from personal experience, but from what I've read, I mean, there does seem to be a tendency to sort of want to get back to something a little bit simpler. Book sales are still healthy. Even I was on the plane to Printing United. I was probably the only one there with a printed book. But from the data I've seen from Publishers Weekly and elsewhere, people are still reading printed books. But so I think that's a little bit of a trend. I don't know how true it is. I mean, everyone says, "Oh yeah, I'm going to disconnect," but yeah, you get the phone out and you're still looking at stuff. So I don't know whether that's an actual thing or what they say they're going to do. I really can't speak to that. Maybe if there are any millennials out there, maybe they can speak to that.
Excellent. If we have any millennials on the call, certainly feel free to chime in the chat field or the Q&A and let us know your thoughts. And while you're doing that,
I'm a millennial, but a millennium earlier.
Yeah. Tell me, what are your thoughts on all of the spam filters and algorithms that are blocking out messages getting through? And is that helping the direct mail industry to still connect with people? A lot of emails aren't making it through the filters. A lot of filters are blocking ads, or you're blocking pop-up ads on your social media pages and so forth. And so some of those marketing methods aren't as effective.
Yeah, I mean, that's something Joe and I were talking about ages ago. Yeah, I mean, spam filters, they filter out a lot of stuff that marketers want to send. I don't get a lot of stuff that we should get. I don't know how many times press releases go right to spam. So that's not good either. So that certainly is a leg up for print. I think the great marketing advantage for print versus electronic is interactive print. I think you put a QR code or some other more elegant way of accessing electronic content on a printed piece. I think that's a slam dunk, really. We started seeing that. I think real estate. For some reason, real estate always seems to be like the market that pioneers all this stuff. But yeah, you put a picture, a sign on or a for sale sign on a house. You got a QR code. You can snap it. You can tour the house. I think interactive print is a killer app. That might just be me, but certainly the ease of getting rid of electronic media, even if it doesn't go to spam filter. I don't know how many times I just log on in the morning, just delete everything sight unseen. But if it comes to the mailbox, I'll look at it.
Absolutely. If it's a physical piece that you have to touch.
Yeah, especially if you use digital embellishments. I'm still on this embellishment kick.
Right. Well, and you have to physically touch it and decide what to do with it. So they're going to evaluate it.
Throwing it away, you're looking at it.
That's right. Versus it never even got through for your eyes to see.
Yep.
All right. Talk a little bit about how do we take advantage of the opportunity for more customization, personalization. You talked about getting a QR code and going to find what you want, but a lot of our brands are acquiring your information in different ways, a frequent buyer card or a frequent flyer number, and then they're turning around and customizing their message to you. What are your options there? And is that continuing to grow and impacting the positive ability for print to grow?
It's continuing to grow. I think the biggest challenge, and this has always been the biggest challenge with personalization, has been decent data, basically. I mean, I don't know how many times I've gotten something that was vertically printed and had a company I haven't worked for in like 15 years. Or Every few months I get something from a realtor that has a picture of my house on the envelope, and it's a picture that must have been from like 20 years ago, before I even owned the place, with there's snow covering everything. The trees that are in the front don't exist, so and then that can be a turnoff, especially if there's incorrect data, if you spell your name wrong, if you get the company wrong. So it's a tough line to walk, but it can be effective when it's done correctly. It's just a question of having access to decent data, whether brands are collecting decent data. And I think there's going to be kind of a pushback from consumers saying, I don't want to give you this much data, because who knows what you're going to do with it. I think there's a lot of resistance, but I think once people see a nice, if you're not being too intrusive into people's lives, I think if you provide just enough data to get them interested without getting too into their personal lives or whatever, that I think is where the success rate is. It's a fine line to cross, but I think it's one we need to figure out how to cross.
Interesting. Sounds like some opportunity for integration, for evolution, for the future of print to continue to thrive.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. Certainly you can get one in at the last minute here if you'd like, and we'll give Richard, you kind of the last word to be able to leave us with your last thoughts.
Despite, I think, as what was it, Mark Twain said, rumors of the industry's death are greatly exaggerated. We're still a healthy industry. Print is certainly growing, maybe not print on paper, but certainly print as ink on some kind of material is growing. We just have to figure out what substrates are growing and how to take advantage of them. But I think there's certainly a very bright future for our industry, however we decide to define it. And would love to find out what you think by taking our annual survey. Take it early
Excellent.
and often. Tell your friends.
Excellent.
Tell your blood enemies.
Excellent. So our listeners will receive a link to the recording, as well as a PDF of the slides that you have shared, so they can access that link and information to be able to share it. We thank you for your time and for your content, for gathering and sharing this information to help our industry to think about the future.
And thanks for inviting me. This was fun.
Excellent. Very powerful. We appreciate you.
Thanks.
If there are no other questions,
if anybody has any questions, richard@whattheythink.com. You can reach me. As long as my spam filter doesn't get it, we're fine.
right. Excellent. richard@whattheythink.com, and we will bring you more content in the coming months. So the next Financial Executives Council is scheduled for November. I believe it's going to move to November 20th at 11:30. The topic is going to be evaluating the wage and benefit survey. Hopefully, Richard, you'll be able to join us, as well as everybody who's on the call. Have a great afternoon, and feel free to reach out to your associations for more information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.